And Stuffy, after the 1921 season, he was traded to the Cleveland Indians. Stuffy, meanwhile, had gotten married, and he married a Manchester girl, and they bought a house in Manchester and were very happy there. But before the 22 season, Stuffy gets traded to Cleveland by Harry Frazee, the one who sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees so he could fund his new hit musical, No No Nanette. So Stuffy spent the 22 season in Cleveland, and the manager there was Tris Speaker, who'd been the Red Sox star center fielder. Stuffy got along with most everybody, but apparently he and Stuffy did not get along. So even though Stuffy had a great year in Cleveland in 22 and set a record that stood for almost a half century for most consecutive fielding chances at first base without an error, which is another reason he should be in the Hall of Fame. That nevertheless, after the season was over, the Indians gave him his release. Stuffy's 32, and now he's something that hardly ever existed back then, and that was a free agent. Because with the reserve clause in place, a player was tied to his team forever unless he was traded. The Indians could have traded Stuffy, but they didn't. They let him go. And the Cleveland Browns wanted him to there because George Sisler, who was their first baseman, was having serious eye trouble, and they didn't know whether he'd be able to play the 23 season or not. So they needed something, as an insurance policy, so they offered Stuffy, but his wife Elsie wanted no part of St. Louis. So Stuffy instead signed with the Boston Braves. He came home to the National League Club and played the 23 and 24 seasons with the Braves. Played very well. The Braves were terrible. I mean, they were a last place team, and they weren't drawing hardly any fans. So after the 24 season, before the 25 season, the Braves told Stuffy that he was going to have to take a pay cut. Well, Stuffy wasn't going to have any part of that. He said, the way I played for you, I'm not going to take a pay cut. So when spring training started, Stuffy held out, stayed home in Manchester. Now the Braves finally decided they were going to release him, so they did, and he figured that was probably going to be the end of his career. But the Pittsburgh Pirates came calling before the season started, and they had a new first baseman who they'd gotten from the Cubs in a trade, but he had been a second baseman. He was just learning to play first. So they figured we need a backup first baseman. We need somebody who can teach this kid and play some for us too. So they offered Stuffy a contract for 25, and he accepted it and joined Pittsburgh. And they made it into the World Series that year against the Washington Senators. And the first 3 games, the kid played first base and Stuffy sat on the bench. John McGraw, who was the president of the Giants and the New York Giants, he hated the American League, and he stormed in after the 3rd game. He stormed into the Cleveland clubhouse. The Pittsburgh clubhouse, and said, "What are you doing playing that bum at first base when you got the first baseman in baseball sitting on your bench? Get Stuffy in there." So whether that did it or not, for the 4th game and the rest of the series, Stuffy played first base, and the Pirates came back from a 3-1 deficit and won the World Series in 7 games. Stuffy had his last hurrah in the World Series in 25. He stayed with Pittsburgh in 26, and then they released him, and the Philadelphia Phillies were looking for a manager, so he managed the team in 27. They were a horrible team. And after 1 year, he'd had enough, so he came home. And at that time, Salem had a franchise called the Witches in the New England League. So they hired Stuffy as player manager. He'd be the manager and part-time first baseman in 28. So he played, that was the only minor league ball that he played other than his time with Haverhill back in '08. Then the Salem team folded after that year. And Stuffy ended up as a college coach. He was at Norwich University for a number of years. I contacted them to see what information they had on him, and they essentially had nothing. They even had the wrong first initial for him. And then he ended up coaching at Harvard from 49 to 55, all the time living in Manchester. But after 55, the Parkinson's disease was getting to him, and so he decided that he didn't have the physical strength to keep coaching anymore, so he gave it up and came home and spent his winters hanging out at Brown's Market in the back room, talking baseball with the boys. And 1 year, he even coached Manchester high school basketball. Joe Hyland, who was the coach, had come down with the mumps, which for an adult can be a very serious thing. And so he was laid up for 2 months. So Stuffy coached the Manchester basketball team for, I believe it was the '45 season. So he had quite a career.